I prepared to talk about ongoing changes in Hungary, and the title of the talk is Trust in Independent Media, Influencers, and New Democratic Actors, Political Scandals and Challenges to Hungary's Hybrid Regime. And the reason why I chose this topic, because in the last 2 months, this spring, we witnessed large scandals and political mobilization against the Orbán regime at an unprecedented scale. Since 2010, for 14 years, we haven't witnessed such mobilization, democratic mobilization. So I would like to talk about this. This is like a first draft of a research paper. There will be 2 cases I would like to talk about. These are 2 scandals, large, high-level political and media scandals, followed up by opposition mobilization, civic and opposition mobilization. One of the 2 scandals that made international news, and maybe you also heard about it, is a case in which the Hungarian president pardoned, gave an official high-level presidential pardon to someone who helped a pedophile in a foster home. The pardon was given to the deputy director of a foster home who helped to cover up child abuse by the director. This was a convicted criminal in prison who was pardoned by the president. And the fact of the pardon was secret, was not public, but it leaked to independent media. And when it became public, the fallout was that the president of Hungary resigned in February. If you look at the image bottom left, on the left you see Prime Minister Orbán, in the middle you see former President Katalin Novák, and on the right you see former Minister of Justice Judith Varga. And the fallout of this large scandal, recent scandal, was that the president and the Minister of Justice in the center and on the right had to resign. They were high-level officials, allies of Orbán, and they immediately resigned after this presidential pardon came out. And also a presidential advisor to Orbán, a third person, also resigned. Moreover, we witnessed large-scale mobilization by civic actors against this presidential pardon and related lack of attention to child abuse cases in February in Hungary. And in the middle, you see the organizers who were social media influencers, YouTubers, Facebook activists, media activists. And on the right, you see a crowd of 150,000 people. This is verified data demonstrating against the government. So I thought this could be one interesting case from a communication media research perspective. How come that influencers who are usually not very political, at least not in the party political sense, became so successful in a passive, kind of apathetic society like Hungary under the Orbán regime? So this is the first case I would like to talk about. The second case somewhat relates to this. After the pedophilia case, the same Minister of Justice who just saw here on Orbán's left was recorded in a private conversation at home, in her home, by her ex-husband, in which the still effective Minister of Justice in power says on the recording that another member of the Hungarian government, the Minister of Intelligence Services, Secret Services, who also oversees media and propaganda, actually deleted himself, eradicated his own name and his crony's name from an official investigation regarding high-level government corruption. So we have the Minister of Justice talking about the Minister of Intelligence on recording, saying that the Minister of Intelligence Services deleted his own name and his crony's name from the official investigation against corruption. So this is a high-level breach of constitutional principles and government wrongdoing. In liberal democracies, constitutional democracies in the West, in Western Europe, or perhaps in the US, Canada, or other countries, my estimation that the government would have resigned on both counts, both on counts of the pedophilia case. The prime minister in Germany, France, or Nordic, Scandinavian countries would have taken the responsibility, Italy. And also in this case, when one minister is on record saying that the other minister deleted himself, and in fact, independent media verified different versions of official documents and verified the deletion. So it's verified by independent sources. Just like in the case of the pedophilia case, successful mobilization, democratic mobilization followed the scandal. The difference was that in the first case, it was social media influencers, and in the second case, it was a new political movement, kind of a would-be party, a proto-party, which organized the demonstrations. There's a new public actor, political activist Peter Magyar, who in who in March and April, just this month and last month, organized 3 demonstrations, the third one involving 110,000 people, verified by independent sources. And there's a new center-right party prepared by him, kind of a Donald Tusk type of center-right party, which already measures 15% in polls among the voters. So this is very new developments in Hungary. In the second case, the regime resists. There are no resignations of the Minister for Intelligence Services, who is on record. The Minister of Justice had already resigned because of her role as counter-signing, second signing the president's pardon for the pro-pedophilic official. So she's not in power anymore. So in the second case, the regime resists and there are no resignations. But there are signs of weakness that the agenda is set by the opposition in Hungary in the 2 last months, both on the streets and in the media. And the backlash is unprecedented, aggressive government propaganda campaign and government coordinated character assassination campaign against the new activist Magyar and other new democratic actors. So in a nutshell, these are the 2 cases, and the logic of the presentation I would like to share with you is based on these 2 questions. Given Hungary has a hybrid system, a hybrid authoritarian political system, and the majority of the media is controlled by the regime and used for propaganda and censorship, how is it possible to mobilize so successfully? We see 150,000 people, 110,000 people in a country of 10 million, very significant numbers. And especially in the second case, Peter Magyar continues to launch his political party. How is it possible that suddenly large segments of the population trust and mobilize for new democratic actors in a hybrid authoritarian regime? How is it possible that public affairs influencers, who are not like commercial influencers, just advertising or marketing beauty aids, but they are commentators, public commentators, they're able to bring 150,000 people to the street, and opposition leader, a new person, a new political activist who just appeared on the screen on February 11th, which is exactly 2 months ago, a young, fresh actor already brings such masses on the street, and in 2 months, his legally not even existing party receives 15% of the vote. So these are the questions I would like to tackle in this talk. And before involving in the case analysis in more detail, first, I would like to expand a little bit on the bottlenecks, the system to which these demonstrations were a shock. What is a hybrid authoritarian regime? This terminology, this jargon, comes from political science. Other terms for the same political systems are electoral authoritarianism, which means there are elections, but it's very hard or impossible for the opposition to win. Another term is competitive authoritarianism, which means there is competition, but still it's an authoritarian system. It's a hybrid regime between dictatorship and democracy, characterized by an uneven playing field. If it's a football field or handball field, it's not even, but it's uneven. And the goal of the government is very tiny, and the goal of the opposition is huge. And there are 5 balls each with the government, and the referees are also nominated by the government. So that's how they play football or handball in an uneven playing field of the hybrid regimes. So in terms of classification, these are not liberal democracies, but soft versions of authoritarianism, characterized by regular violation of the division of powers and constitutionalism in liberal, that we know in liberal democracies, the whole principle of Montesquieu of division of labors is regularly violated. Competitive elections are biased. Just at the bottom of the slides, you can see that OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, labeled Hungary's elections free but not fair. The only country in Europe. Also, Freedom House, the American think tank, labels Hungarian elections free but not fair, and Hungarian media also not fully free. The Orban government enjoys a supermajority in parliament, which enables it to change the constitution, and they regularly change the constitution very often. But the funny thing is, they, even in 2010, they only vote with 53% of the votes, and since then it's only 50-something%. So there's a lot of non-proportionality in the system that gives extra weight to the winner. So it's not that 2/3 of the people, of the voters vote for them, it's 50-something%, but there's a heavy shift of parliamentary seats to the winner. The Orban government is also very keen and active in terms of gerrymandering, retailoring, recutting, rearranging constitutional electoral districts in a way that they give the best results to the governing party, Fidesz. So these are some instruments ensuring political hegemony. Just to be quick, because it's not a political science analysis of the Hungarian state, but just to flash some jargon, some key terms. In political science, they use the term state capture that refers to a small power elite that usurps the resources of the state. In political economy, a related term is the mafia state, in which a political family functions like a mafia, again, siphoning off resources from the state and privatizing large segments of the state and other property using state state policies and tunneling, fueling, bringing public resources to the political family. In this case, actually, Orban's very family, including his daughter and other family members and oligarchs around him. Yet another term less well known is lawfare, which comes from international relations and military security studies, which means war by law or weaponization of law. This refers to aggressive instrumentalization of legislation, policymaking, also highly partisan uses of courts, including the Constitutional Court itself, partisan changes of the Constitution to promote the party in power, and court decisions. Courts are biased to demobilize and demotivate democratic opponents. So it's kind of a lawfare domestically pursued by legal means. It's war against society by the state with the means of law. So these are a couple of terms to characterize the hybrid regime of Hungary. And I thought it's important to mention them because they contribute to the question, how is it possible that effective mobilization or relatively effective mobilization took place in the last couple of months in the country? This is a communication and media studies seminar and doctoral school. So it's important to look at the media side of the equation. The Orban regime's media system could be characterized as a propaganda state. In terms of hardware, the structure, it involves former public service media that before 2010, before the Orban government, used to function as European type public service media. It's part of the EBU, the European Broadcasting Union, but today it's fully functions as a government mouthpiece. The Orban government also created a large public foundation, a state-controlled foundation of 500 plus media organizations of legacy media, newspapers, and online media called Central European Media Association, KESMA in Hungarian, which is also centralized and fully controlled. Added to this, we witness a ring of oligarch-owned pro-regime media. All this is highly centralized, controlled, censored, and instrumentalized. So much that the Prime Minister's office, the propaganda ministry in Hungarian, in that context, issues regular guidelines, written guidelines to all these media, hundreds of media, where the content is the same very often every day. Showing the level of centralization, like actually in old Soviet time, Soviet rule times. Every Friday morning, Prime Minister Orban gives a radio interview to state media, former public service radio, where the anchor is, just an empty space, just to giving kind questions, not opposing or asking any tough questions. So it's another venue for the government and for Orban himself to roll out his weekly messages. So we have the daily messages by guidelines of the Prime Minister's office. We have weekly messages, and there are annual or seasonal messages. The President of the United States gives one State of the Nation address in Washington, D.C., or the President of the European Commission gives one State of the Union address in Brussels, while Orban gives 4 State of the Nation addresses, all widely covered in the propaganda state. All this is bagged or made actually sharper by regular character assassination campaigns, smear campaigns against opposition politicians, NGO activists, public intellectuals, some of our academic colleagues in Hungary, even sports people, poets, average citizens who participate in demonstration or stand up. And some of these character associations could be very tiring and heavy psychologically. And some of the people who are attacked are fired from their jobs, including schools and universities. Besides the propaganda functions, the propaganda state also has censorship functions, because all this media empire that I described, which is about 80% of the Hungarian media system, depending on how you calculate it, but about 80%, has very important censorship functions. Because whatever happens that is not in the interest of the regime, of course, this system will filter or censor it structurally or in a targeted way. So it's like a heavy lead bell over the country, which makes it impossible for its consumers to get the information about public affairs. Once again, it includes the former public media system. So that's the structure of the propaganda state, and just a couple of words about the software, the discourses, the frames, the messages. Excuse me. We may call this a hegemonic state populism, which is a semi-official discourse that legitimizes this hybrid regime. The key issue here is enemy creation and massive campaigns against securitized, well, the basic function is securitization and enemy creation. They could be migrants, George Soros, Brussels, the EU, Washington, the US, domestic opposition, or critical speakers. And we also witness growing militarization of the Orban regime's discourses, definitely not against Russia in the Russian-Ukrainian war, but unspecified potential regional adversaries. We also witness growing military education in elementary schools for boys and actually weapon production in Hungary. But once again, I don't want to spend too much time with this. It's just giving the context, because it's that hybrid regime, that political regime, and that propaganda state against which the social media influencers and the new political party are campaigning, are mobilizing in the last 2 months. So I just wanted to give a contour of the state and its different functions to give a context. So let's look at the cases then. And please stop me anytime if you have any questions or if you don't hear well or there are any technical issues. So the first case, as I said, it used to be a scandal around a pedophilia case, to be followed up by mass demonstrations organized by social media influencers. On the top right of this slide, you see the influencers, YouTubers, and media activists. And on the bottom, you see this crowd of 150,000 people on Heroes Square, one of the symbolic squares of Budapest. President Novak gave this presidential pardon in secret. She never thought this could be leaked. It was actually a kind of a legal administrative mistake how this decision became public. And it was buried in some kind of a legal gazette that publishes some legal proceedings. And it was an old lawyer in the Hungarian countryside who had the hobby of reading this legal gazette, where he actually picked that bullet point that President Novak gave presidential pardon to a deputy director of a children's home who covered up the sexual abuse of underage boys by the director of the foster home. And then he leaked this information to an independent news portal, 444.hu, which immediately published, wrote up a short investigative piece. The government, the president of Hungary, Novak, and the Minister of Justice who countersigned the pardon, as I said, they resigned in a few days. Orban immediately distanced himself. It was his vital interest. So he sacrificed the president and the government member, the Minister for Justice. Why did Novak grant presidential pardon to someone supporting a pedophile? So hard to understand, and we are not very clear on that, but she just said in a statement, video statement, that she made a mistake, quote, in believing, quote, that the convict did not exploit the vulnerability of children, so he was innocent. But independent media investigated many details of the case, many sides that we don't have time to cover, but they actually investigated that it was one powerful government advisor and the president's advisor who convinced her about the pardon, and other influences, other pressures from Orban's environment came to the president, and that's why she gave the pardon. But back to our question, how come the social media influencers on the right were able to organize such a large anti-regime rally in showing solidarity for the victims and demanding a better and safer childcare system, including foster homes? We need to look at the context a little bit deeper. The Fidesz government, Fidesz is Orban's party, the Fidesz government had been pursuing a right-wing populist agenda, and part of it is a kind of official, super conservative, traditional values agenda. Traditional values is a term from Russia. It's not traditional values in terms of family heritage or religious values. It's a political product that the Kremlin, the Putin government created for domestic legitimation, and it also exports for the use of right-wing, extreme right-wing populist parties in Europe and elsewhere. The Orban regime follows very closely the Russian state ideology of traditional values. This involves anti-LGBTQ plus agendas, anti-feminism, and a very strong pro-family and pro-children strand. I'm not sure if you travel to Budapest these days, but even at the Ferenc Liszt International Airport, there are huge billboards in many European languages that Hungary is a child-free, pro-children country, which reads okay in some languages, but in other languages it sounds very weird. Pro-children, or we are for the children. But this is the context. And it's in this pro-family, pro-children context, forced ideology, where the question comes, how was it possible that regime leaders pardoned a convicted helper of a pedophile? So in this whole case, we witness a situation in which conservative, pro-family, pro-children regime ideology and propaganda actually backfires. Because it's that very regime who established itself being pro-child, has leaders, top leaders, who give pardon to a helper of a pedophile, of a convicted criminal in prison. Accordingly, well, this is a kind of an abstract analysis, but when it comes to the polls, national polls immediately after the news of the presidential pardon came out showed that there's a national supermajority against the presidential pardon, including pro-regime, pro-Orban, pro-Fidesz voters. So it was, you can see on the top right, demonstrators saying pedo-Fidesz. Fidesz is the name of the governing party of Orban, and pedophile is the name of the case. So pedophiliac Fidesz became immediately the stamp. So Orban immediately distanced himself, sacrificed the two high-level officials and the government advisor. And the reason for this was because their own voters turned against angrily the government regarding this, more exactly the president. On the bottom left, just to show one face, one of the key organizers of the large demonstration, YouTuber, stand-up comedian Edina Potyondi. She's 34 years old, and she was one of the organizers and the major speaker of the influencers demonstration. So this is the first case I wanted to share with you. And in the conclusion, I'll try to present a more structured reason why they were able to mobilize so well and against the propaganda state and the hard limitations of the hybrid regime. And there will be some joint conclusions with the other case, which is a new politician, Peter Magyar, who also successfully mobilized in the last 2 months, actually. Now it happens that Peter Magyar is the former husband of the Minister of Justice, Judit Varga. That's her on the other side of former President Novak, the woman in black. So she was involved in both scandals. because she is the one whose sentences were taped in their home by this political activist Peter Magyar when they were still married some years ago. So Peter Magyar actually recorded his wife, Minister of Justice, Varga, saying that the other government member removed himself from the official proceedings, official documents, official evidence regarding a high corruption case. Since then, they divorced, and Peter Magyar came out with the recordings, which was, of course, very controversial. Even if you're a democracy activist, do you really tape? Do you really record your wife's home discussion? But anyway, he did. So in a way, so now I'm trying to ask the question, why is Peter Magyar so successful in his mobilization? As I said, no one knew him until 2 months ago, exactly on 2 months ago, when he came out with a large, long interview on the YouTube channel Partisan, in a country of 9.6 million people, less than 10 million people, 2.4 million people actually watched that coming out of Peter Magyar as the former husband of the former Minister of Justice and the new public actor. And that number just shows the tremendous interest in him. Basically, every fourth citizen, including children and old people, and cities and villages, actually watched that video. So who is he? Who is this new activist? He is a center-right centrist position, somewhere between Donald Tusk and Macron. Sometimes he emphasizes he's more center-right, sometimes centrist. It's unclear. He is somewhere between. In the European Parliament, he wants his party to sit with the Christian Democrats. He organized 3 demonstrations on, you can see the images on the right side. First, the upper image depicts the demonstrators in front of Parliament in Budapest, and the bottom one is his march. And the slogan, which he shows, translates, "Do not be afraid," kind of in Slavic languages, something like "Nie boj sa," which is a quote from John Paul II, Pope, the Polish Pope, the anti-communist Polish Pope, who also supported solidarity. So he's a conservative center-right figure who uses the former anti-communist Polish Pope's "Do not be afraid" slogan to mobilize against the Orban regime, which is a new thing, because the old opposition in Hungary used to be liberal and left-wing, and they have been unable to overcome or even to pose a threat to the Orban regime since 2010, in the 2014 elections, 2018 elections, and last time in the 2020 elections. So Orban already won 4 cycles of elections against the left-wing and liberal opposition. And now we see a new center-right party along the Donald Tusk lines to be formed by Peter Magyar. During the demonstrations, it's an interesting thing because there are former government voters, disillusioned Fidesz voters, pro-Orbanists, and some liberal left demonstrators also. He also shows that there is a very significant base for center-right vote in Hungary. Before Orban took over Hungarian democracy from 2010, he already kind of massacred other right-wing and center-right parties. There had been pluralism on the Hungarian right, but Orban, with intelligence, secret service means, and political and administrative means, swept clean the right party and monopolized the whole right-wing scene of Hungarian politics. And now we see the re-establishment of a center-right political alternative by Peter Magyar. But it's very new. It's only 2 months. We don't know where it will lead to. Having said that, nevertheless, Magyar was able to reappropriate national rhetorics and national symbols from the populist extreme right, that is Orban, for the democratic center right. He established a patriotic language and symbolism, which is very new, because the old opposition, the liberal and left opposition, didn't really use national symbolism. You see many Hungarian flags, for example, or people in the demonstrations would wear Hungarian national colors, scarves, or other kind of symbolism. They also sing folk songs together with pop songs that used to be sung by left-wing and liberal opposition. So he was actually able to create a mix from these trenched or divided cultural symbolism that characterized the old opposition. And the old opposition spoke the language of rights, human rights, a liberal language of rights and democracy and European EU discourses that simply could not be popular enough to speak to a large voting base, which it seems Magyar is able to talk to and mobilize through the use of democratic patriotism. So these are two reasons: a kind of moral authority. He is coming from the regime administration. He knows it from the inside and breaks up with it. He gave up his well-paid positions in Fidesz as former husband, a former Minister of Justice. So moral authority and this kind of center-right Donald Tusk type of position gives him a good position for mobilizing. I don't want to go to the details, but he's also organizing a party now and also a movement. He's alone. That's his weakness. He's a charismatic leader, but still it's a one-man political alternative because he distances himself both from the regime and the old liberal and left-wing opposition. So he wants to create a triangle, kind of a Mercedes-Benz sign type of political field in Hungary with the Orban regime and the left and right or center-right opposition. But it's very hard if you do not want to take over politicians from other parties. You want to create, you fight against the regime and the opposition at the same time and speak low of them. Where do you get your politicians from? There are some civic activists, but he, as I said, has been around only for 2 months. So his major challenge is to find new politicians, co-politicians, colleagues, friends, and comrades. He's a charismatic young leader alone at the moment. Of course, government propaganda and character assassination immediately attacked him, but interestingly enough, it backfired. Because in the pro-regime media sector, which is the larger sector of the two-sectored media system, there was this unprecedented campaign against Magyar, including biased news, paid social media videos on YouTube and Facebook, and I'm not sure about TikTok, but definitely YouTube and Facebook, including character assassination, using family affairs, his relationship with Varga, with supposed domestic verbal violence. Varga also came out in TV and interviews speaking against him. But of course, Varga never spoke about her responsibility in the pedophile case and in the other case where his ex-husband taped him, actually talking about another government member breaching the very foundations of constitutionalism. She's silent on that, but she's very vocal against, in terms of, or about the domestic verbal violence of Magyar, who shouted at him. So there's a lot of aspects. The point is that government propaganda actually made Magyar very well known in the whole country, in the whole population, including regime supporters who never heard of him now. And there's this unexpected spillover effect that people became interested, even right-wing, even pro-regime people, and went to independent sources to learn more about Magyar. And as I said, he has a wide support base, part coming from old, disillusioned opposition voters, part from undecided voters or people who would never go to vote otherwise, and some even from pro-regime voters. There are already public opinion polls about him showing he can pull supporters from all three camps. Well, we still have some time, but of course, I'd like to leave time for conversation, discussion. So I'd like to turn to the conclusions here. So back to the question, how is it possible they were mobilized, they were able to mobilize so successfully these new political actors? Part of the reasons are constant. Part of these preconditions are remaining factors, are constant factors. So first, I would like to talk about the constant factors and then the new factors. Well, first of all, in Hungary, there is a surviving minor free media sector. So it's not like Russia or China, where the 100% of the media is government controlled and propagandistic. The internet is not controlled in Hungary as opposed to Russia and China. And the majority of independent media is now internet-based. It's not print, it's not legacy media, it's not TVs and radios, but it's internet-based. It's partly online news portals and partly YouTube channels. There's free media on the internet, which had a major role in breaking the scandals and telling voters about the follow-up investigations regarding the child abuse case as well as the other case. Social media influencers are also important. They reach up to 1 million people in a country of 10 million. And there's only one remaining national independent television channel, RTL, but it's a commercial channel. So although it's truly independent and democratically minded, but the evening news is only 20-25 minutes and only one part of it is political news. So there's a limited amount of political news, but it's hard news and very significant in actually spreading out the word about these two cases. And they also had an instrumental investigative role in covering the pedophile case, going back years. Actually, they were the first investigative journalists at RTL were the first covering this pedophile case, which was followed up by the court case against the director and the deputy director. So the first point, which is about remaining factors, there is free media in Hungary, maybe 20%, but it's very important, and there could be spillovers in cases of crisis, reaching more people, including pro-regime people. When I said the Hungarian population became so angry over the presidential pardon, I mean, this means that pro-regime supporters, pro-Orbanists, pro-Orban people also got news, and they got it from the free media. It spilled over. The second point is that Hungary doesn't witness significant organized political violence. So it's not like Russia or China, or where Navalny is killed, or other political leaders are killed, or in China where people disappear. There are administrative, political, legal limits ensuring the survival of the hybrid regime, as I referred to earlier. Activists could be fired from their jobs, political activists in state-controlled organizations. Some of them are high school teachers or university professors, and it happens. But it's not government, but it's not violence. People don't get killed. Another constant factor is generation change. The Orban regime is becoming old. Orban himself is 60 past, and his most of his cronies are of the same generation. That's why the former President Novak and former Minister of Justice Varga were actually important, because they were young women handpicked by Orban to make the regime look younger and more gender balanced. So it's a very sensitive loss to the regime to lose them. But voters are becoming younger, and as everywhere in Europe and basically the world, from Turkey to Poland and the United States, there's this democratic iron law of social demographic factors. The younger you are, the more urban you are, the more educated you are, the more democratic you are. This is why Erdogan's city opponents keep winning Turkish cities, and this is why cities in the United States vote Democrat and not Trump. So this is also true for Hungary. But let's see the more interesting new factors. What's new in these contexts, in these, in these cases? And then these are the final slides. In the pedophilia pardon scandal, we witnessed a moral supermajority of the people. Pedophilia is not a political issue. It's a moral issue. There formed a moral supermajority backed by wide-scale public anger over the president's decision to pardon the pedophile official. Even pro-government voters despised that decision. So it was that decision that it became public, independent media became public, became a lethal threat to Orban. It could have swept away the government. Had Novak and the counter-signature Minister of Justice resisted resignation ordered by Orban, the government would have been swept away by public anger. So he had to sacrifice these two high-level allies. So in a way, it was a huge mistake by the government. More exactly, they thought it would remain secret, this presidential pardon. The president and the Minister of Justice made a mistake with the pardon, hoping the pardon decision remains secret. What we witnessed in terms of the logic of Öffentlichkeit, the logic of the public sphere, is a spillover of agendas and discourses from the independent media to the whole population, including regime supporters. Independent media also exposed many layers, personalities, facts, networks, correspondences, pressures on the pro-government, pressures on the president for the pardon, because the person who was pardoned was a pro-Fidesz good old comrade. It was based on this moral supermajority of society that influencers were successful in mobilizing 150,000 people. It was a non-partisan mobilization. Social media influencers actually asked people not to bring party flags to the event. They wanted to ensure the civic character of this event. So it was a successful large demo. The weakness is it's a civic event by influencers. Nobody followed it up. It was one huge event. But then influencers went back to their YouTube programs or stand-up comedies, and there's no follow-up, which is different from Peter Magyar, who organizes a political party. So the outcome, to put it short, that Orban lost three key political allies, the president, the Minister of Justice, and one key government advisor, but was actually successful, distancing himself from the scandal, and he survived very well. Finally, what about Peter Magyar's successful mobilization? As was discussed, he has the moral authority of an insider who records and publishes evidence of a major, serious, anti-constitutional breach of government conduct, although it's his own wife who is recorded. He occupies a center-right position, and there is a very significant social support for that. He's successful in reappropriating national discourses. He's successful in building organization top-down because he's alone. A movement and the party, he still needs to find other leaders. A charismatic young leader, he's still alone. The government propaganda and character assassination against him backfires because it makes him well-known and created interest in other independent media sources about this guy. Interests that this highly censored propaganda media could not fulfill. He also has a wide voting base from several sources, pro-government, pro-opposition, and undecided voters. So this is the final slide. And despite of all this, we have to agree that the Orban regime is still intact. Orban sacrificed 3 high-level allies, but the mobilizations are going on, but they are only shocks to the system at the moment. The system stands. Maybe it trembles, maybe it shakes, but it stands. It lost some popularity. There are polls showing significant losses. Some leaders are lost, but the system is still intact. There is only relative success of these post-scandal demonstrations. We will see whether Peter Magyar's party building will be successful. It's still very early to say. As said, he just showed up on the scene 2 months ago. What's coming up? As everywhere in Europe, new European parliamentary elections in June, where Magyar will run, or intends to run, because he's still organizing his party. And then also there are local elections where he wants to run, and the national elections in 2 years' time. The vision of Peter Magyar for a post-authoritarian democratic transition are threefold. Either forcing Fidesz, Orban's party, to have a minority government, where the 2 forces of the opposition, center-right, center-left, has the majority, but they are not in government, but Fidesz has to run alone a minority government. The second option is that Fidesz is forced to form a coalition government where they cannot do whatever they want, and Magyar would be willing to go on coalition with the former autocratic party. And yet a third idea is that the 2 branches of the opposition form a government, but because Magyar is very critical of the old left and liberal opposition, it's unclear. It's really unclear whether that could be possible. So there are pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses concerning all 3 scenarios. So thank you very much for your attention.